And so he looked at me, and it was interesting because he was actually disappointed. And he actually said, "You're not really going to make very much money doing your work like this. So if you deliver a supreme return on investment for your client, your expertise saves your client $5,000, $10,000, $25,000. And if you're a tax professional, you know that this does happen, right?" Well, it's easier than you might think. A lot of people would look at a tax professional and think, of course they're making good money. You know, they're getting paid hundreds of dollars for something that takes 30 minutes or an hour. What people don't know who aren't in the industry or maybe don't have as many contacts as we do in the tax industry is that there's actually plenty of tax preparers and tax professionals that really are not making the kind of money that they want to, and in many cases are actually struggling financially. And so the purpose of this video is to share something that tax preparers do who do stay broke, right? And the purpose of sharing this is that if you don't want to stay broke, this is something that you would want to look at changing. I think probably the easiest, most relatable way to tell you about this topic would be to just share a personal story. So when I was a tax preparer and I wasn't making the kind of money that I would want to, was definitely feeling a little bit of frustration from that fact, right? I had a client where it was a messy divorce. There was a couple properties involved, and I just went above and beyond for this client where I had found this loophole that I know other tax professionals wouldn't have found. I had contacted other people. I called like my uncle, who was a big CPA. He helped me. I did all this research, right? And then I came back to this client and I presented him with a solution of something that was a huge stressor in his life. He was like arguing with his ex-wife, and the whole thing was a giant mess. He kept coming back in the office over and over, right? And so then I presented him with a solution where he ended up saving, I think it was like $75,000. And so versus what he was expecting, right? So he was expecting to owe like $75,000, and we found a legal and ethical way for him to owe $0. Now, the gratitude that he felt, especially knowing how hard that I had worked on this for him to get him this result, it was an interesting dynamic because I felt great about it, you know, as I wanted to relieve his stress. I wanted to provide him with a great service. And then, so when I went to pull up the invoice for this work to close out his tax preparation for this year, it said $350. And so what I told him is I said, that'll be $350. And so he looked at me, and it was interesting because he was actually disappointed. And he actually said, "You're not really going to make very much money doing your work like this." And he actually candidly told me that. In other words, indicating that he knew I just saved him $75,000 and I'm charging him $350. And so what I did is I took the wisdom that he had shared with me, right? Well, I took his $350, but other than that, I took the wisdom that he shared with me, and I had a client coming in the next week who had a similarly stressful situation where he was stressed out of his mind. And instead of going off the forms, I ended up just charging this client a retainer of $2,500, which previously I had never charged a client more than probably $500. So what happens is, if you want to stay broke as a tax professional, the best way to do it is to not monetize your expertise when it presents, I should say, a great ROI for your client, right? So if you deliver a supreme return on investment for your client, your expertise saves your client $5,000, $10,000, $25,000. And if you're a tax professional, you know that this does happen, right? If you don't want to stay broke and you want to move towards financial freedom, making the kind of money that you want to make, you want to have, how should we put this? Somewhat of a killer instinct, we could say, where you're not afraid to go from $350 to $2,000, right? To $2,500 to $3,000, as long as you know the value is there and the results from the client. So if you're sitting here saying, I want to do this business as a community service, you know, I don't really care about making money, that type of thing, which some people do that, and that's okay, right? Then you can just never do that. right? Never quote unquote overcharge a client, like go higher than the invoice says or higher than your form says or what your flat fee said, right? However, if you want to not be broke, if you want to be towards moving towards being quite not broke, and be financially successful, we want to look for those opportunities where our hard-earned expertise presents a great ROI for the client and allows you to capture some value for yourself, for your career. And there'll be other opportunities, right, where you haven't presented that much ROI for a client. You haven't saved them any money at all. So maybe the price even comes down on that. You're not really able to do those kinds of things, discounting for clients that are totally broke themselves, those kinds of things. We can't have that kind of generosity and still have a good business unless you're willing to have that killer instinct in the situations where that your knowledge has created an amazing value for that client, and you are not afraid and you act boldly to go ahead and participate in that value for yourself financially.
Hey, this is Imelda here, and I just wanted to take a moment to remind you that if you'd like to keep up with our latest content, to make sure you subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching.